Hey everyone, it's Jack, and today I'm going to do a little something different and talk about the history of Xfce. Xfce is one of my favorite desktops on Linux, and it is also one of the best desktops, in my opinion, on the BSD OSs as well. So anyway, Xfce, the history, yeah, I gotta hand it to myself. I thought that was a great idea, and I thought of it all by myself. I am a genius. No, I'm kidding. Actually, this was a suggestion by Mustafib. Mustafib, thank you. I thought this was such a great suggestion that I just stopped and dropped what I was doing and decided I'm going with this first. So here I am. And so Xfce, personally, like I said, is one of my favorite desktops, and Xfce was started way back in 1996. And by the way, the information I'm going to be giving you about this, the source is based on Wikipedia, the Xfce page that they have there, because they have a lot of great details. And so I'm going to pretty much go along with the materials that are on Wikipedia for this, because that way I can be fairly accurate, I think. And even though I know my way around Xfce a lot, I didn't realize that Xfce went quite far as back as 1996. Wow, that's really cool. So yes, I'm going to go with the Wikipedia stuff here, but hopefully I can put it into a context which is a little bit more relatable and maybe more fun to watch. So anyways, way back in 1996, Olivier Fordan, I think that's how you pronounce his name, started this project. It was a Linux version of the Common Desktop Environment, CDE, and that was a Unix desktop environment, which initially was proprietary, and then later it was released as free software. However, over time, Xfce diverged from the CDE and now stands on its own, of course. So the name Xfce was originally an acronym for Xforms, Common Environment. But since then it's been rewritten. They don't use Xforms anymore, but that was the original toolkit. However, they decided to keep the name Xfce. So originally Xfce was all capitalized Xfce. However, now, since it doesn't really stand for anything because they're not using Xforms anymore, now Xfce is in smaller letters. So just the first letter X is capitalized typically. And people even came up with their own kind of acronyms for it, like X freaking cool environment. And I guess Slackware, according to Wikipedia, kind of nicknamed it the cholesterol-free desktop environment, which is a looser interpretation of the initials. So yeah, that's really cool. I like that. If any of you have ever installed Xfce, a vanilla version of it, you've always seen the little mouse logo there. And so the mouse logo, I guess, kind of has a cartoonish world domination kind of twist to it, I suppose. And they also mentioned that in the Super Tux Kart game, where you have all your various open source mascots race against each other, the mouse is supposedly a female whose name is Chu. Chinese name, Chu. I guess that's how you pronounce that. That means snow in Chinese, and is a girl's name. So yeah, interesting. I like it. So anyways, way back when it began, when the project was created by Xforms, it was a pretty simple project, and back then it just consisted basically of a simple taskbar on Sunsight. Now, Olivier Fordan continued developing this project, and back in 1998, Xfce 2 was released. And so it took about 2 years, and then version 2 came out, and so this was the first version that had the Windows Manager XFWM. And back then, he actually wanted this project to be included in with Red Hat Linux, but they refused because Xfce was still based on Xforms. Oh. So, yeah, that was a downer. So Red Hat only accepted software that was open source and released under either a GPL or BSD compatible license. But at the time, Xform was closed source and was only free for personal use. So yeah, that kind of put a dent in the whole thing. And so for the same reason, it also wasn't included in Debian before version 3. So Xfce 2 was only distributed in Debian's contrib repository. Yeah. But in March 1999, Fordan said, screw this, I'm going to change. So he did a complete rewrite of the project and based it on GTK instead, which is a non-proprietary toolkit. And it was rising in popularity at the time. So the result was Xfce 3. So now that he was licensed under GPL, along with being based completely on free software, nice. The project gained GTK drag and drop support, native language support, and improved configurability. So Xfce was uploaded to sourceforge.net and way back in February 2001, and that version was 3.81. So Xfce started to take off by then. So you could consider the modern Xfce starting with version 4, which was released on September 25th, 2003. So Xfce was upgraded to use the GTK2 libraries. Yeah, now we're getting advanced. And then there was a release in January after that, which was 4.20.0. And that was released in 2005. So as you can see, you might be seeing a pattern here where the release cycles seem to go right about every 2 to 3 years. And closer to 2, it looks like, here in the beginning especially. In 4.2.0, it now had a compositing manager, or a compositor. And so for XFWM, which added built-in support for transparencies and shadows. And that's one of the things that you're going to notice the most when you have a compositor, is you have those little effects. Transparency, drop shadows, and so forth. That was cool. And so then the icon set was also SVGs, which are vector graphics. So your icons are better quality and they don't pixelate as they get bigger. So that was nice. And then comes around January 2007, we came out with Xfce 4.4.0. So when that was released, that's when Thunar File Manager came about. Before that, they were using XFM, and I don't think I was even using Xfce back then, so I don't have any personal experience with XF File Manager. I'm assuming that stands for. Also, support for desktop icons was added as well. So apparently you didn't have desktop icons before 2007. Wow, didn't know that. That's fascinating. And also they made improvements to the panel to prevent buggy plugins from crashing the whole panel. So apparently that was an issue back then, where plugins would kind of crash the whole thing. So yeah, that must have been a welcome change for sure. Then in 2009, in February, came out Xfce 4.6. And so in this version, they had a new configuration back end added and a new settings manager, along with a sound mixer, a new one, and several major improvements to the session manager and the rest of Xfce's core components. So 2009 looks like it was a pretty big year for Xfce. It made a nice jump when it hit 4.6.0. Then fast forward a couple years later, again 2 years, Xfce 4.8.0 was released, and this version includes changes such as the replacement of Thunar VFS and HAL with GIO and UDEV. And unless you're a Linux guy, that probably won't mean much. Console Kit and Policy Kit, new utilities for browsing remote network shares using several protocols including SFTP, SMB, and FTP. Nice. Window clutter was reduced by merging all the Thunar file progress dialog boxes into one single dialog, so you didn't have all those floating progress things floating around when you're doing multiple stuff, which is great. And the panel application was also rewritten so it could be positioned better and have transparency and have an item launcher manager in it too. And it also introduced a new menu plugin to view directories. Also, the 4.8 plugin framework remained compatible with the 4.6 plugins, and the display configuration dialog in 4.8 supported random, 1.2, so it could detect screens automatically and allow users to pick their preferred display resolution, refresh rate, and display rotation. And multiple displays can be configured to work either in clone mode or placed next to each other. Keyboard selection was revamped to be easier and more user-friendly, and also the manual settings editor was updated to be more functional. So that was huge. 4.8 was definitely a big deal back in 2011. And I remember way back then, toying off and on with Xfce, but I still wasn't a fan. I was still more into the KDE kind of stuff. I was still kind of a KDE person back then, and once in a while GNOME, but KDE I think is where I leaned the most, if I remember right, way back then. So yes, that was a big jump there. And then finally 4.10, and I remember when 4.10 came out, I thought 4.10 was kind of cool. And maybe it was by 4.10 that made me realize the stuff that was available in 4.8. So to me it was kind of an extra big jump because I don't think I paid much attention to it probably for several years on that. So that was released back in April 28th, 2012, another 2 years. So in 2012, a vertical display mode for the panel was introduced. They moved much of the documentation to an online wiki. So that kind of took the load off of things. So the main focus of that release apparently was improving the user experience. And I do remember when that was released back 4.10, and I thought that was kind of a nice release. But again, I probably didn't pay much attention to the 4.8, so for me it was kind of like looking at it again since 4.6. So it was a huge jump for me. Then way up in 2015, which was 3 years later, came out Xfce 4.12. That was almost 3 years later. 2 years and 10 months to be exact. And around that time, a lot of people were speculating on the internet that Xfce was dead. They were like, yeah, this desktop is pretty much history. It's gone. Forget about it. Look at other stuff. So, but it wasn't. Xfce was alive and kicking. I guess probably the 3-year cycle probably had people wondering. Hard to say, especially when it was following a 2-year cycle for so long, and then all of a sudden it's almost 3 years before anything happens with it. And I think that's kind of what fueled the speculation, but I'm speculating, so. So a lot of people like me were happy that Xfce was not in fact dead. And so when it came out, the aim actually here in this release was to improve user experience once again, and also to take advantage of the new technologies that were introduced into Linux since 2012. So in the past 3 years, a lot of things have kind of changed. So Xfce was growing, evolving, and adapting with those new technologies as well. Also, there was a new window manager. Also, there were new features in the window manager, which was great, like the Alt-Tab dialog where you can see your open apps and all that and scroll through them. Also, smart multi-monitor handling and new power management plugin for the panel's notification area was also introduced. And the text editor was rewritten to be better. Plus, the file manager was enhanced, and I think also started supporting plugins and bookmarks. So Thunar was starting to become cool, in my opinion. And Xfce 4.12 also started the transition to GTK3, because back then everything was GTK2 and now transitioning over to the new version 3, and so Xfce was one of those, and so they started porting all their applications and plugins over to GTK3. And not only that, but they also kind of reinforced their commitment to the Unix-like platforms other than Linux by featuring OpenBSD screenshots. So yeah, very cool, and that's why you see Xfce so much on OpenBSD and other Unix-like platforms like that. OpenBSD, FreeBSD, and other Unix-like platforms, because Xfce kind of has its roots of inspiration from CDE in the Unix days, from Unix. And then Xfce 4.13, the development release, was released next, and the wiki doesn't really specify when that was released. And this was the release, it was a development release, so it really just kind of marked the full transition from GTK2 to GTK3. So once they got everything ported over, then that development release was released. And then if you fast forward to 2019, Xfce 4.14 came out. So now we're talking like another at least 3 years since the development release, or less, depending on when the development release came out. However, the planned release of 4.14 was announced back in April of 2016. So I'm kind of assuming that 4.13 was probably already out by then. So I'm thinking 4.13 was probably either released later in the 2015 or early 2016. And so even though it was announced in 2016, it was actually officially released in 2019. And they probably announced it in 2016 so people wouldn't think that it was dead again. So anyways, the main goals of the release included porting the remaining core components from GT2 to GTK3. So apparently there was still some GTK2 core components remaining that I didn't mention before. And then they replaced the dependency on dbus glib with gdbus. So that was kind of the new 2.0 version, so to speak. And so GNOME's implementation of the dbus specification is what that is. And they also removed deprecated widgets, but the major features really weren't going to be released in this version. They wanted to save that for 4.16 because they really kind of had more to go on that. And they also bumped up the minimum version of GTK3 from 3.14 to 3.22. So that was kind of a big jump there. But for all those other goodies, you had to wait for 4.16, which is what we're in now. And 4.16 was released on December 22nd, 2020. So some of the big changes in 4.16 I went over in some of my previous videos, of course. And those included things like the new icon set, which has a cool new look, and then a more consistent color palette, which I thought was really nice too. And they also had the improved interfaces for changing system settings and other panel improvements like animations when you hide the panel and so forth, auto hide and stuff like that. And the new notification plugin, which had support for both legacy systray and the modern status notifier items. Also had better support for dark themes, and that was one of the things I thought was really cool. And they added more info into the About dialog as well, which I kind of like that too. But the dark theme support, that really kind of got me. I really like that because you could like set your dark theme and make your menu dark, and you could give it, you know, any kind of look, but you could still have your light background in a file browser or whatever. So the fact that they were able to separate that and give you a hybrid option, I thought was really cool. And so to me, 4.16 was a really kind of a big deal. And I really liked their goodies. I thought it was worth the wait, actually. So that jump from 4.13 to 4.16 was awesome. And now that we're at 4.16 and this was released in December 2020, and now it's 2022, we're not that far away from the next release. And I bet the next release is going to be so great, they'll probably call it Xfce Jack. I'm kidding. So, yeah, Xfce has really come a long way over the years and established itself as one of the great desktop environments of Linux. And it's also the default desktop in all kinds of different distros out there, including Manjaro, which is one of the biggies for Arch Linux. But not only Manjaro, but you got like Endeavor OS, Kali Linux, Linux Lite, MX Linux, Solid XK, so many. Ubuntu, of course. So you got so many distros that have Xfce as their default desktop. That's got to tell you something. And I only named a handful there are a ton more distros out there that use Xfce as their flagship or default desktop environment. So Xfce is just a fantastic desktop. It's something that I use all the time. I've always come to favor Xfce over the years. I remember I was, for a while, kind of a KDE fanboy. KDE has really evolved a lot, and I got excited about KDE again in the past couple of years when it started becoming so resource friendly, and it was rivaling Xfce with its lightweightness. And so that kind of brought me back to KDE for a while, but I still found myself drifting back to Xfce, and there's just something about Xfce that I think is better. I don't know what it is. It's hard to put my finger on it. Maybe because it's just so reliable. I never have issues in Xfce really at all, very rarely. When I do have issues, it's typically not related to Xfce at all, but rather maybe the platform, like it's an Arch issue with an update or what have you. But other than that, to me, Xfce is the most stable, rock-solid, trouble-free desktop that I've ever used. And so I think that's why I just keep coming back to it, because sometimes I get in these other environments and play for a while, whether it's KDE or GNOME or Cinnamon or any other desktop. Something always drives me back to Xfce, whether it's performance, lack of bugs, what have you. And Xfce is just so configurable, and they got the best weather app. Yeah, not the weather app is the be-all end-all of Linux, but it's just another one of those things that just kind of shine in Xfce. So Xfce is a wonderful desktop, and if you've never used it as a desktop environment or just thought it was too yuck looking, maybe you ought to give it another try and just look at one of my older videos on pimping up Xfce. You can rice up Xfce to look great. And so you'd be surprised what you can do with it. And it's a lot of fun to customize. Xfce is very customize friendly. And with that, I hope this history lesson was helpful and semi-entertaining. And if it was, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And hit subscribe. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.